Hello, I'm Tim Wall, Senior Reporter for Pet Food Industry. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Ask the Pet Food Pro, How to Reduce Pet Food Drying Energy Use and Carbon Emissions. Ask the Pet Food Pro is a series of professional chats that offers an unparalleled opportunity to connect with industry experts and pose the questions that are most on your minds. Ask the Pet Food Pro is brought to you by Pet Food Forum and Pet Food Industry's journalists and editors. Drawing on our combined decades of experience covering the dog, cat, and other pet food markets, you can find our reporting and analysis at petfoodindustry.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter and monthly magazine. Today's discussion focuses on how to reduce energy bills related to pet food drying while also reducing pollution production. Bühler sponsors this edition of Ask the Pet Food Pro. Our expert guest is Dave Carney, Area Sales Manager for North America for Pet Food and Aquafeed for Bühler. Welcome, Dave, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks to you and Pet Food Industry for inviting me to be on here today. I appreciate it.
So before we start the discussion, I do have a few announcements. Audience members, you've all been muted to ensure that everyone can hear and focus on the discussion, so please submit your questions or comments in the chat box. Please note that this chat is being recorded, so you can access the recording starting in about a week at petfoodforumevents.com. Click on Ask the Pet Food Pro tab at the top. All right, Dave, let's get our feet wet talking about drying. First off, could you tell us a little bit about energy use by dryers and give us a synopsis of how reducing dryer energy usage can be good both environmentally and economically?
Sure, Tim. So as our audience probably knows, the dryer is one of the biggest users of natural gas and electricity in your facilities. So you have to be careful on using it properly, using it correctly and efficiently. And those things happen by trying to make sure your dryer is running properly, it's maintained properly, and those type of aspects. The big thing you're trying to do with the dryer is to dry the product and get a shelf-stable product that you can bag without risk of contamination or any sort of callback. So you're trying to dry it consistently across the bed for consistent products. So those things are very important to make sure that the dryer is efficient and you're not wasting energy.
Gotcha. So getting a little bit more technical on that, how do you go about controlling the dryer energy consumption while maintaining a consistent kibble moisture?
So what you need is a well-maintained dryer, and that is making sure that it's operating as designed. And you can do that both internally with your maintenance team and your engineering team, or the providers of the dryer can do performance assessments where you're looking at the dryer not operationally, where you're checking for any leaks at the doors, for seals, you're checking for is the bed running properly? Is it aligned? Are there internal panels that are not there that should be there? Those type of things are great to do. When you're running the dryer, your internal quality team is checking the moisture of your outgoing product to make sure that it's meeting what your standards are. If you think about a dryer, think about the bed leaving the product leaving discharge as a tic-tac-toe board. You've got those quadrants there. You want to make sure those quadrants are as close to the same moisture percentage as possible to make sure the product is all good. And you can use your data analysis to determine where you stand and then take that back to the maintenance team to make sure it's running properly.
Gotcha. You gave us a couple of examples there. Could you tell us maybe a little bit more about what are some quick wins that manufacturers can implement to improve the energy efficiency of an existing conveyor dryer?
Sure. So when you're running a particular product, you likely have a recipe of how that runs. That is the bed speed, the air temperature, the temperature you want to run the dryer, and the airflow that you're going to run through it. You want the incoming product from the extruder to be meeting those standards. So you want to make sure that you're coming in at the moisture that you would expect. The first thing as the product feeds the dryer is you have a feeder. A lot of times this is a oscillating spout feeder, potentially a oscillating belt feeder. You want the bed to be properly flowing across the bed. You want the product filling and you want it to be level. You don't want it to be high on the sides, low in the middle, high in the middle, low in the sides. That way that affects your airflow. So you want all those things to be properly done and make sure that's run. The gaskets around the doors, if you walk around the dryer when it's in operation, if you feel hot spots there, maybe your gaskets need to be replaced. That's a rather inexpensive way to keep the dryer running. I talked about the bed being centered from end to end. If it's not centered, you could have some losses within the product area of air exiting when it shouldn't be because it's slightly offline. Sensor calibrations. You want to make sure that the sensors are properly calibrated to the right temperature so it's reading what you expect it to. All of these things are basically having you contain the heated air in the product area where it's meant to be. So that's kind of the essence of making sure the dryer is running well.
Gotcha. So expanding on that even a little bit more, what are some of the equipment components that could typically offer the highest potential for energy saving through maintenance or repair?
So I'll just touch on the feeder again. Those rotate side to side. You want to make sure that's consistent, flows well, it doesn't get caught on the end. Faster in the middle, faster on the sides. That's a quick one there. A lot of the older dryers are fans. The recirc fans are 100% on. There are no VFDs there. So if you wanted to save some money there, you could put VFDs on the fan and only get the air that you need to properly dry the product. Burners, of course, are very important. Burners last a long time. It's great to have a burner team within your facility. It's even better to have a burner expert from one of the burner suppliers who you're quite familiar with, who comes in frequently to make sure that's running well. All the other moving parts of the chain, making sure the chain doesn't stretch out and improperly run, and just keep that air inside the bed as you want to properly dry the product.
Gotcha. So speaking of some of the things that might go wrong, how could a clogged conveyor bed plate and gasket wear affect energy efficiency and heat loss?
So the dryer is designed to flow air either from the bottom of the bed plates up through the product or the other way around. And if the bed plates are clogged, you're restricting that airflow and you're not letting the heated air go through the product, through the bed, and out. So you might have a position where your kibble in that section is not properly drying. That then affects that tic-tac-toe at the end of the dryer if it's not properly dried. So you want to do things like corn grit blasting at maintenance times to clean the bed plates out. That helps you there in making sure the bed is properly maintained and clear. On the gaskets, you're just losing air from the outside, so you want to eliminate that. And then we've also gone to, in newer developments, adding more insulation in the doors to contain that heated air in the dryer.
See. So we've gotten a few questions beforehand about energy harvesting. Could you tell us a little bit about what are the main differences between direct heat recovery and heat pump systems in terms of energy savings and CO2 reduction?
Sure. So this is kind of a phased approach that we're looking at right now, you're going to bring the air into the dryer, you run it through the product, you exhaust it out. Now, what you do with that exhausted air is the newer part of that. Well, it isn't so much new, it's been around for a while, is you try and reuse that once heated air. But you've got to filter that air to get the fines out of it and bring it back in. And you want to reuse that air. That prevents you from having to start lower temperature air and heat that air up through the burners. You can start from a higher point. So those heat exchangers are an air-to-air or a fluid heat exchanger to condition that once used air and use back in as makeup air. If you do that, you can save roughly around 15%. If you want to build on that, you can add a heat pump to drive that air temperature higher. Again, less new air coming in at a higher temperature, less natural gas used, more CO2 savings. With doing that, you can save as much as maybe 35% or so to that number.
How could a manufacturer go about deciding which of those heat recovery methods is going to best fit their operations?
So the other step there, that's step 1 and 2. Step 3 is if you wanted to change your heat source away from natural gas. You can use steam, you can use electricity to change that heat source. Steam, you need, you eliminate all CO2 if you use steam or electricity. You need a good maintenance staff who knows how to manage steam, condensate, steam traps, all of that to effectively run that type of system. With power, you have an additional heat source there instead of the air plenum above the dryer, which is running your heat, where you have heater coil boxes. So that's additional space you have to have. And if you have heat exchangers, a heat pump, and these heat coil boxes, there's additional space required for the box of the entire dryer. So you have to kind of be wary of that, or be concerned and account for that as you go down this path.
Gotcha. And how could an advanced control feature like a humidity or moisture module also help to provide a return on investment for manufacturers?
So we and others have begun a process to put an offshoot of the discharge of the dryer to run through its own separate duct, and that is run through a microwave sensor. That microwave sensor checks the moisture of the product at that point and sends with a feedback loop back to the controls to either change any of the bed speed, the fan speed, or the temperature. And it can do that in a quicker process than the entire run of the 2-pass or multi-pass dryer for pet food to react quicker. And what that does is it streamlines that moisture around your target quicker. So those things will prevent losses of using too much natural gas, using too high a temperature to get you to the right moisture that you're looking for.
Gotcha. So expanding on some of that idea of how data and knowing what's going on in your system can help with efficiency, how are some ways that data analytics can be used to optimize the drying process and reduce energy consumption?
So in practice, with some of the things we've done, we've seen that as these systems are put in place, the product continues to flow down the bed. You're continuing to minimize that range difference from high to low of your moisture. And you see that in what you're doing. You just have to maintain that upstream so that you continue to not negatively impact that. So that gives you that additional control to bring you in line. And the intent there is to ship closest to the intended moisture of what you can bag for product. And that's what we're trying to get to with these types of analytic systems. The other things that happen is you can determine how you run products differently. When you run them, the temperatures you're running them, you can see what happens at breaks. You can see what happens if you change operators out from one to another. How the extruded product moisture comes in from one product versus another, and how you align to that. So just to better control everything you have.
Gotcha. So on kind of a larger scale, or looking at the system itself, could you tell us a little bit about what are some of the advantages and challenges of transitioning from natural gas to an alternative fuel source or electrification for a pet food dryer?
Yeah, so I mean, the steam transitions have happened for a very long time. If you choose to go to steam or away from steam, with steam coils, you have to make sure that you properly filter the air coming out with the fines so that doesn't come back to the coils. Because if so, there could be ingredients within the fines that could negatively impact the brazing of the coils to be a problem for you and cause a major repair of having to replace coils. Mm-hmm. On the electrical side, it's additional power. So you bring these coil boxes in, you bring a heat pump in, you do have a bit of, power that you consume just by adding the heat pump. But with the heat coils, there's a lot more power needed that you were doing before with natural gas. So you have to account for that. There's additional transmission required as a capital expense to the customer putting this in, along with the space. I mean, pet food companies are generally, lined side by side. So you have to have the space for these additional pieces of equipment factored into your floor layout.
Gotcha. And as another alternative, how could a hybrid system combining multiple heat sources contribute to long-term sustainability goals?
Well, the cool thing about that is if you have a hybrid system, again, the space constraint, you have to be able to pump both natural gas and electricity, for instance, is you can monitor what your power costs are, what's your gas price, what's your electricity price, and you can manage how you're going to control the dryer based on what that price is, with that flexibility to allow you to make that change.
Gotcha. And so with a retrofitted system, how do those compare to a newly installed dryer in terms of sustainability, impact, and cost savings?
So the newer dryers, a lot of work has gone into for cleanability and sanitation, because that's become so much more prevalent over the last few years. So those features are more in the newer dryers. They're still, of course, looked at in the older dryers, but you need to make sure that you start from a fresh point of everything's running as best as it can do before you start with this implementation of going to some sort of sustainability package for your dryer.
Gotcha. And speaking of that, how can operational savings from energy efficient upgrades justify that initial investment by pet food manufacturers?
It can. I mean, a lot of times with my project management career, you were always asked to look at a 2-year window or less in ROI. And in this case, it's a pretty big capital expense. Then you have the additional power needed. So it's a longer term payback just simply for that. But a lot of the pet food suppliers now have sustainability goals coming up in 2025, 2030, 2050 to be carbon neutral by then. So it's a different type of savings that you're trying to do. You're telling your consumers that you care about the environment, that you're going to eliminate this and go down that path. There are customers who are utilizing different budgeting formats to apply for these type of sustainable projects instead of just a standard, facility budget for repairs.
Gotcha. So speaking of some of those long-term sustainability goals, how do energy assessments play into achieving those goals and supporting an industry-wide net zero ambition?
So I happen to be with our team when we did an assessment recently, and you go through the entire mechanical assessment, make sure everything's proper. You run it in process. You see how the temperatures are, the airflows are, so you get an idea of how able that dryer is to be updated to those things, and we can make suggestions on the best path to update that for sustainability with our customers. So, and I'm sure we're not alone in that, but it's just the ability to understand what makes sense for them.
Gotcha. Gotta make sense.
Yep.
So let's look now at some of the questions that we've got coming in from our audience and see what topics are on the minds of pet food professionals. First off, I do have one that came in earlier through our registration. And we had someone asking if Bühler had gained any experience in using specific functional raw materials to improve dryer efficiency.
I'm not sure exactly what they mean by that, but we're primarily stainless steel. We used to do painted carbon steel a while ago, and it just became inefficient for the upkeep of that, both for us and for our customers. So primarily we're stainless steel. We have used some different gasketing material in the past couple of years that's worked well for us on doors. Other than that, I can't think of other things we've done material-wise for our dryers. We've gone to a higher finish level on our dryers to enable the finish to be better, to be more product contact, and things like that. We've gone to a tip-TIG welding, which is more of a product contact level. So those are kind of the main things I can think of that we've done that are material-based.
Gotcha. And another question that came in earlier asking about what are some of the largest energy consumers in the pet food production process? Are dryers up there as some of the largest energy consumers?
Most definitely, yes. Dryers are if you look at how much a dryer puts out, one of the recent ones I looked at was something like 600,000 BTUs an hour, is a pretty high user there. So anything you can do to minimize that number and make it run efficiently is better for you.
Gotcha. So we've got one here from a chat. In order to effectively dry the food pellets, how important is it to remove the fines prior to the drying process and thereby save energy costs? And how is this performed? Removing the fine typically from a vibrating screen or another technology?
So the fines are kind of a process of how well the pellet is extruded, and based on the vibration in the dryer, they can fall off some. So it's handled two ways. The fines fall off the end of the dryer. We have a drag chain that takes it off the floor of the dryer, drops it to the end fine screw. And for some of the newer ones, we also have a plenum fine screw too that has the same similar drag chain to take it to that. And then based on whatever the customer wants on either a single collection point, multiple collection points, we can determine that through a meeting with them on what they want, on where the fines collect. And generally they go back to regrind and are reused.
Gotcha. So another question coming in from the audience, considering the popularity of sustainability, um, how can the pet food manufacturers integrate the dryer sustainability into the sustainability story that they're sharing with consumers? For example, I would imagine most pet owners probably don't know that dryers are one of the larger energy consumers. How could a pet food manufacturer share that story?
Oh, I've seen things in your magazine about it, and other publications, or potentially stories can be done about what they're trying to do. But I've seen some TV commercials based on some of the manufacturers who are looking to try and be more sustainable and reduce their footprint. In fact, I think I was in an airport, and they talked about getting to be zero carbon emissions within the airport at a certain time. So it's becoming a big process around the globe for everything. But I think it's just a matter of getting the word out on the efforts that they're doing. They're also they can counter their production with wind farms and green energy credits too. That's how some of them do it as well.
Gotcha. So just a question I had following up on that. Are you aware of any companies that are doing that, perhaps using like solar panels on their plants or something like that to
I am. I don't know that I can really say who they are, but yeah,
they
yes,
exist,
I'm
they're
aware of
doing it.
some who have solar fields in other areas, and some at their facilities as well. Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. Sorry.
Right. It exists.
Yes.
So this might be more of kind of like a question for a salesperson or something like that. We have a question about how do Bühler dryers compare with respect to moisture variability across the width of the bed, and is there data that you can point them to?
Um, I think our competitors and Bühler do a very good job drying products. I've known some of the guys who are competitors, and they do a good job as well. Our effort is to try and produce the most consistent bed we can, and we're trying to do that within one percentage point across the entire bed, across all those quadrants. So that's kind of our effort. That's our goal. We will sometimes do activities as part of the installation and commissioning where we test for that. So that's something we can build in for a new installation. In process assessments, we will get those numbers and use them as a guidance for something that might be wrong with the dryer.
Gotcha. So we have a follow-up question related to the raw materials. Does Bueller suggest experimenting with recipes or ingredients to improve dryer and energy efficiency? Is that a service that you all offer?
We can do trials. So we can do trials for some types of products within the states. If it's human grade ingredients, we can do them in our trial facility in Minnesota. For extrusion, we do drying trials here in Raleigh. If it is something non-human grade, we can do those trials in Switzerland. So if there's something that a customer wants to try, we can do that in a small scale versus them having to run a huge lot of product that they would be unable to sell.
Gotcha. And we have a um, technical question here. Looks like one producer has an AeroGlide horizontal dryer, or three AeroGlide horizontal dryers at their pet food plant, and they're experiencing overpressure in the dryer. how would you go back to an under pressure inside the dryer without increasing the gas consumption?
The dryer's over pressurized.
That's what it's saying. Yeah, they're experiencing overpressure in their dryer.
Okay. Well, first of all, if the dryer is on VFDs, they could lower the frequency of the VFD to reduce the pressure of the product and determine how that output changes what the final product is. If and so the idea there is to try and not raise the temperature by doing so. In an overpressurization step, that should work. If it is not on a VFD, they could use sheaves on the fan to possibly change that.
Gotcha. Now, is it typical that a dryer in-feed system will need to be adjusted for different kibble sizes, shapes, and densities? And is there a way to automate that?
Um, it can be. Really, the feeder system is pretty in normal launches is one speed. Because of some of the preferences there, we have systems where we can add on a a simple drive system where it can speed up to the edges to try and control that. So that's something that can be done. It isn't standard on most feeders, but it's an add-on potentially.
Gotcha. So speaking of add-ons or brand new, with the projects that are coming down the pipeline, are you seeing more new production lines or people retrofitting existing production lines?
The way I've stated it, and I've been in sales for now, this is my 8th year, is the U.S. is very stable it's been in pet food production for a long period of time. There are some new places coming about, and that happens, but it isn't as frequent as refurbishments or replacements. So that's what I'm seeing most is dryer replacements for customers.
Gotcha. So, just an anecdotal question. Are there some examples where you found where a company has really, either done a retrofit or something like that and found just a dramatic energy savings? Is there like some real wins that you could maybe, without necessarily naming names?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I don't know that they've ever reported back what their savings have been, but I mean, there are I mean, it is not unusual to see 40-year-old dryers out in the field. So those have obviously been retrofitted over time. So there's real value in retrofitting them from the capital sales new product guy. I don't get a new dryer with that, but the equipment runs and services the customers quite well. So they continue to do that. It's just in a lot of cases, it's a cheaper way to go about making sure you run it, and it also can be quicker too. And as we've gone through in the past 4 years or so, with COVID, out of COVID, all of the people who got new dogs and cats, the pet food producers have been running crazy for a long time, and any shutdown is just something they're trying to avoid so much. So refurbs are a big part of what we do and other people do as well.
So on the sustainability aspect, I mean, it would seem that refurbs might be better in a sustainability sense, and that they would require less raw materials to make new machines. Does that make sense to you? Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, it can. I mean, you're replacing, some of the running components within the dryer. As long as the frame's good, you can replace a lot of what's inside. So there's less raw material used there. Using sustainability as less raw material, not sustainability as an energy change. But yeah, there would be less total material used to do it with a refurb.
Gotcha. So we were talking a little bit earlier about the efficiency being affected by the dryer beds with airflow perforated slots partially plugged. We got a question from the audience earlier about about maybe going into a little bit more detail of that and how that can really affect operations.
Sure. So, I mean, you're talking about the main conveying method of the product going through the dryer. And if you have fines that maybe you're coating your pet food before it goes into the dryer, so that can help collect it into the bed. And you are imagine a clogged sink. It's a similar process. You're trying to flow water through a clogged sink, and if it's clogged, it's not going to flow through. If a clogged bed plate, you're not going to get your air to go through. Your air is going to choose a lesser, easier path to go through, so it's going to divert away from that bit of kibble that the bed plate is blocked and go somewhere else. So that will flow down that length of conveyor with clogged beds. That won't get dried. If it's on the top bed, it'll turn over, it'll get mixed some, but it's still not dried as well as the rest of it. So what that tends to do is to correct that. The easiest correction method is to over dry everything else. So if you're drying down to say 4%, that's a lot of water you've dried out of the product that's viable to ship if you could have everything running consistently across the bed. So that's kind of the problem you have with clogged bed plates. So that should be something that you check on, periodically. And a lot of people have like a 2-week shutdown for cleaning when you can do those sort of things, and then just plan for a long-term. It's kind of a sandblasting process that you can do to clean them.
Gotcha. Now, you mentioned COVID earlier, and of course, the big problem a lot of people were facing, and besides the actual pandemic, was all the supply chain disruptions that came up with that.
Right.
Is Bühler still seeing problems with getting materials for the dryers or any other supply chain disruptions?
We've kind of overcome that. During COVID, even steel was hard to get and costly to get at times, and components were harder as well. So what we looked at, we just did a long-term buying analysis of what we needed to plan for, so we could plan for what our expected orders were, order what was needed ahead of time to account for that long lead time that we were seeing. But we've really come out of that pretty much at this point, and are more or less back to normal for raw materials.
Sounds good. So we have a question here about what does Bühler offer with their dryers in respect to automation and leveraging feedback from extrusion, and also post-drying operations such as coating and cooling to help optimize the dryer set points?
Okay, a lot of questions, different things. So we offer Drying Pro and Moisture Pro. Those are two add-on packages that have that microwave sensor plus software that goes along with it to let you analyze the data, pull that data, understand how you're running, how you can improve things. And we have teams of people who support you in that. Will work on reports to provide you to see maybe things you haven't seen in your operations to try and streamline things. I think you mentioned coaters in there. We do a drum coater, which would be post-drying that can do up to 4 tons an hour. So it's you'd be collecting it and then running it through the drum coater there. We are in development of a vacuum coater, which is being designed by our China engineering group, and we are trying to get them to do the UL work to allow it to be sold in the US, and that's still TBD for us. Was there anything else I missed in there?
So coating and cooling.
Cooling. Yep. So, I mean, there's a competitor of ours who does a great job on a vertical cooler. We have one too. It's our AHLB product. It is an octagon-shaped product. The feed comes in from the top. There's a cone inside. The product goes onto that. The airflow on the perforations come from inside to out. It dries it and drops it down the bottom. We've looked at it for a few places, and as of yet, I've not sold any here in the States. So we've looked at it for some folks. But I mean, they're great competitors out there who have good products. So sometimes they get placed instead of us.
It's like Miracle on 34th Street, your competitors. So we have a question here. Well, just actually, I guess last week we did Ask the Pet Food Pro about freeze drying. And we talked about freeze drying, air drying, regular drying, the differences between those. Do you see a growth in the air drying and freeze drying in comparison to regular drying? And perhaps could you compare how those all work compared to drying?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, we're focusing on air drying here. We're not really into the freeze drying or the air fryer kind of opportunities, but I have seen them come up over the last couple of years. I go to some of the consumer pet food shows, and there's just been a lot more growth in them, in that market segment, to utilize them. I don't know how big they can be. I mean, our dryers can do anywhere from 1,000 pounds an hour to probably 25,000 pounds an hour. So it's a big product. I don't know if those freeze drying products are to that level or not, or whether they need to be, for instance. So it's something I'm really not well versed in. So maybe that's a topic for another session, another time,
Sure.
on freeze drying.
So I have seen a lot of new products with that air drying, label made air dried. Have you noticed that more companies kind of putting that out there, that they're, saying that it's air dried as opposed to just being the way it is?
I have seen it some, and I don't know whether it's there's something innovative and different, or whether it's sort of a consumer thing. Because I mean, having an air fryer at home, we use it a good bit, from from doing bread like things to doing vegetables to doing any types of different things. So it's kind of an innovative approach that maybe a lot of the pet food types are sold for the consumer because the dog is a member of the family, like mine are. My wife calls our dogs the three good children, so they are much like members of the family, and we want to feed them well. So I think it's along those lines of humanizing pets, I think.
Gotcha. Kind of switching gears a little bit, we do have a wide audience here all around the world. Do you see any regional differences in relation to the types of dryers used, drying trends, or product trends related to drying?
Regionally, I'm not. I mean, I think we do a lot of the same products here and in Europe. I know that we have worldwide customers who buy the same equipment for South America, Central and South America. Those are very similar. I think just because of distance, in Asia, a lot of the products for drying are made in Asia and kept in Asia. But it's similar concepts of what we're doing.
Mhm. So if we turned this around and you were the one who was out there looking to buy a pet food dryer, what would be some of the top questions? What would be the top three questions, let's say, that you would ask of the dryer manufacturer to make an informed choice?
Sure. So I'm going to take the role of like a plant manager, who has maintenance capabilities and engineering. What I'd want is a dryer that's efficient for me, a dryer that goes together well, a dryer that's easy to assemble, that is easily cleanable, because that's something. Sanitation is huge these days. You don't want any microbial hit, so you want a very open dryer that you can get to, and it is designed to not collect product in it that can then potentially mold, because you get mold somewhere and you're chasing it everywhere to find out where the source is. So those type of things are very important. We do a kind of a fixed base. Imagine rounded train tracks, if you will. So when the dryer installs, it installs modularly, and it rolls down this track from one end to the other to make installation quicker and easier. So those type of things, a high level finish built into the dryer is a good thing because of product contact and potential avoidance of mold growth, things like that. And this fines management system that allows you to quickly and effectively remove fines from the dryer without a lot of post sweeping, brushing out, and then a control system that will effectively manage moisture consistently through the dryer.
Gotcha. Things to keep in mind when on the market.
Yeah.
So one of the hot topics of this year, probably in the future as well, I mean, artificial intelligence and how that's being integrated into a lot of machines that are out there. So I have a question here about: do you foresee artificial intelligence being integrated into adapting dryers to various products or recipes to work with an automation system, or to increase their sustainable credibility to reduce energy usage?
Sure. I mean, it's kind of happening everywhere for us. I've not been involved in conversations we've had with it, but the advancement of controls and the advancement of learning, machine learning has been, continuing to rise. So I think it's certainly something that's coming where, our controls are, you're trying to make minute increments to better increase the consistency of the dryer. Those things I think are going to drive and be driven by AI.
Yeah, it's certainly something that's touching pretty much every aspect of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So to get onto the subject of sustainability, and again, don't have to name names. Have you found any plants or seen any plants that were able to get to like a net zero, at least in terms of dryer energy usage?
Um, as of yet, no. I mean, it's early in the process for us. We've had conversations with many different people, and we're discussing projects with them and what their plans are. And it's sort of with that step process we've talked about. It's how deep do they want to go? What sort of capital investment do they want to take to get to sustainability?
Gotcha. So putting yourself again into a little role playing here, if you were to visit a pet food factory for the first time and your task was to optimize a horizontal dryer and reduce gas consumption, what would be the main steps that you would take to get started?
I'd want information on the dryer to know how it was designed, to know what the airflow should be. I would start with that. I would ask them to have the dryer stopped but not cleaned yet, to see where the product collects, to see where the fines are, to know how the airflow is running. Then I would go from the top to where the feeder's feeding the product once it's run, to see how that's feeding. And I would ask for quality results on what are the moistures that you're seeing in the dryer. And then we would do a process audit where we would go through, determine temperatures in different sections of the dryer, airflows, how the exhaust system's running, just to try and see where those problems might be. And with that, you'd also be looking at any leaks for air coming out of the dryer and try and correct those things.
Yeah, it goes back to some of those things we were talking about earlier of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So another question here about how does Bühler address challenges related to maintaining the nutritional integrity and palatability of a product during the drying process for a premium pet food product?
So the process is somewhat similar, that you're trying to maintain the outgoing moisture of the product to what the customer specifications are. So when we design a new dryer or work with them on an existing dryer, we get what their expected rates, product density, moistures are anticipated to be, to meet those when we provide them a dryer. So the idea there is, if we can deliver to that, beyond that point, they should be able to test and meet the criteria that they were looking for.
Gotcha. Circling back onto the topic of AI, do Bühler's dryers currently use the Internet of Things technology?
We've used it in our Dryer Pro and Moisture Pro in developing of that. So yes, we've used it there. Yeah.
So on that topic, how much of these monitoring software and things like that can be done remotely? Do you have people there in a control room, or are these things that you can get remote alerts on your phone, or can you?
Great question. Yes, they can be done remotely. So they would be available on the HMI on the dryer, but they're also there's a companion package with it that allows you to monitor it on your phone. So you can take it and go. You can be, you could be a shift supervisor on first shift, and you're checking in on how your third shift is running from your phone to maybe determine something that might prevent you from having to go in to support your third shift team. So yes, you can monitor them from remote sites, whether that be an iPad or phone or what have you.
Gotcha. So remote work even works for this.
In a way, yeah. Yes.
Now, was that something that perhaps got kind of pushed a little bit further during COVID? I know for many companies, COVID really pushed a lot of that need to work remotely and things like that. Has that been a technological push?
Um, yeah, but it really happened before that because I mean, some of these companies are sites around around the world, and you may have a high level manufacturing director or VP who wants to know what's happening in different facilities, so they want that access. So we planned for that as we developed our Moisture Pro systems to have that available remotely depending on levels, and it's tiered. You can have certain levels of control for an operator on the floor versus a manager versus a high level manager on what they can change and what they can't. You wouldn't want someone to make a big change remotely who wasn't there to monitor it. You wouldn't want an operator to make some huge wholesale change that potentially drives a good bit of scrap. So we can work with our customers to develop particular facets to the software for access levels.
Gotcha. And just one more question I had kind of thought up when you were talking about some of those questions to ask about, potential for fungus and things like that. What are some of the things that people should really be watching out for? What are some of the risks that a company needs to be watching when things are going through a dryer, and what are some of the things that they need to monitor to avoid any problems?
Well, the essence is getting good product out, good safe product for pets. And one of the things you want to make sure of, I think, is you want to make sure your bed is tracking well and not going from one side to the other. If that can happen, you will get some metal rubbing on metal and potentially have metal shavings that will go somewhere, and it could likely go into a wrong place. If you see in an older dryer, there should be some level of darkening from the amount of heat. If you see shiny metal in a place where it shouldn't be, like on the outside of a chain roller or a chain support, something like that, that your bed is tracking. You can see that from either the front end of the dryer or the back end. Either end, you can see whether the roller is rolling centered on the support plate below it. So those are one of the things I would look for to make sure you don't have any problems there. Escaping heat, things like that. So you want to make sure and keep the heat within the box.
Gotcha. And speaking of the heat in the box, is there an ideal drying temperature or time and a moisture level to ensure quality and shelf stability of dry pet food?
We used to think it was somewhere like in the 220, 270, somewhere in that range was fairly standard, but I've seen it all over the map, and it depends on the product. I mean, we were recently in a facility where they were running at a high of 200, so 180 to 200 Fahrenheit, which seemed quite low. We were surprised by it, but that's how they run it. So it kind of depends on the product and what you want. It's a balancing act of how quick you want your product to turn versus the characteristics of it when it comes out. Gotcha. And if you find you can run it at a lower temperature, you save yourself some gas by doing that.
Gotcha. Bring it back to the sustainability aspect.
Yeah.
So, what is the moisture dispersion with the Moisture Pro?
Our intent is to try and be around 1% across the bed, if we can do it with that. So the intent. Well, the customer provides what the intent is. We've kind of come to the position that 8% moisture outgoing product for kibble is a proper moisture that will let you bag it after drying and not have any potential for mold growth. A lot of times, if there's variation in the bed, they'll dry down to 6%, 4%. in sections to make sure that everything is below that number. And then you're just, you're spending more energy to dry to a level that you don't necessarily need to because you're not running efficiently. But in Moisture Pro, our intent is to try and center around 1% variation across the bed.
Gotcha, 1%. So what are some of your thoughts around the pros and cons of horizontal versus vertical drying technology as it relates to process control of moisture and energy?
Okay. I'm a horizontal drying advocate. I know there's a huge company that does vertical drying. I believe that the method we use for horizontal drying better ensures the equal drying of all the products because we change the airflow from up initially to downflow. So you're drying from the top, you're drying from the bottom up first. Then you get to the next zone and you're drying from the top down. And then you mix everything up on a multi-pass dryer, and then you do the same thing where you're drying from up again on the next, and then down again. So you've kind of equalized that drying, and you've mixed it up in the middle after you had a drying step of both upflow and then downflow. So I think, and the vertical process, I think it has cascading decks where it dries to one section around it, then it dumps it to the next deck down and it dries again. So I just think our method and mixing is more effective from what I've seen.
Are there any differences in terms of sustainability versus horizontal and vertical on the subject?
So in vertical dryers, the drying temperature is lower, which is an advantage for vertical drying. So with that, you use less natural gas than you would on a horizontal dryer. So there is a benefit there. To counter that, if you have space available for a longer dryer, you can run a longer horizontal dryer at a lower temperature and not have as much gas used that way. But a vertical dryer does run at a lower temperature than a horizontal.
Gotcha. All right. Well, those were some great questions, and I don't see any more coming in right now, and we're getting pretty close to the end of our time. So I'd like to give a great big thanks to you, Dave Carney, Area Sales Manager for Bühler, and to Bühler themselves for sponsoring this edition of Ask the Pet Food Pro. Do you have any final thoughts, Dave?
Well, first, thanks for all the questions everyone asked for the group that was here. I appreciate that. I appreciate you and Pet Food Industry for inviting me. And as we get towards the end of the year, I'd like to wish everyone happy holidays. Hope that in the downtime coming up, you're able to rest and recover from all the hard work I know you've done in pet food over the last year or years. Then one of the things I found great about pet food is it's a very long-term career. I've met a lot of folks who've been around for a long time doing this, and one of them joined the chat. I got to meet him firsthand in Kansas City earlier, Mike Flood. So thanks to everybody who joined.
Yep, I'd also like to thank you, our audience, and thanks again, Dave. We would greatly appreciate any of your feedback, the audience that is, or Dave if you'd like, on today's chat. So if you would scan that QR code that you should now be able to see, you can access the survey. We'll also email you a survey link very soon. Do please watch for more Ask the Pet Food Pro chats brought to you by Pet Food Forum and Pet Food Industry. I'm Tim Wall, Senior Reporter for Pet Food Industry, and I'd like to say thanks again to Bühler, Dave, and to the Watt Global Media staff that made this possible. Thank you to our audience for joining us, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day or evening, depending on which side of the planet you call home. So until next time on Ask the Pet Food Pro, bye-bye.